My daughter-in-law and my son scoffed. "What is that poor woman doing here at the auction?" I remained calm and quiet. 30 minutes later, I raised my paddle and bought the luxurious $5 million mansion they were interested in and were fighting for. I never thought the day would come when my own son would look at me as if I were trash on the street. But that day arrived, and it happened in public, in front of people I did not know, in front of strangers wearing expensive suits and watches that gleamed under the lights of the city's most exclusive auction house. I stood there in my simple beige dress, my worn leather handbag that I had bought more than 20 years ago, and my comfortable shoes that made no noise when I walked. I did not draw attention to myself. That was exactly what I wanted. To go unnoticed, to observe, to wait. I entered the large hall with its cream-colored walls and marble floors that reflected everything like a mirror. There were round tables with white tablecloths, elegant chairs where people were already seated, reviewing thick catalogs. At the front was a dark wooden podium where the auctioneer was arranging his papers. The air smelled of expensive perfume and money. I walked slowly, looking for a place to sit. I did not want to be too far forward, nor too far back. A discreet spot, a place from where I could see everything without being seen. Then I heard him. That voice I would recognize anywhere in the world. My son's voice. The same voice that, as a little boy, would tenderly call me Mom when he had nightmares. The same voice that now sounded hard, cold, mocking. Mason, my only son, 42 years old. Dark hair, slicked back with gel. A charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than all the furniture in my living room combined. A gold watch on his left wrist. And beside him, her, Victoria, my daughter-in-law, 38 years old. A fitted red dress. High heels that clicked with every step. Long, straight hair that moved when she turned her head. Lips painted the same color as her dress. And that expression of superiority she always had when she looked at me. They were on the other side of the room. Mason had a catalog open in his hands. Victoria was pointing at something on the pages while she spoke. I could not hear what they were saying from where I was, but I could see their gestures. The way she moved her hands, the way she felt, they seemed excited, anxious. They were here for something specific. I knew it. I had read the same catalog as them. I knew exactly which property interested them. The mansion. The $5 million house in the most exclusive part of the Hamptons. 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, infinity pool. Lakeview. Gardens designed by award-winning landscapers. 4-car garage. It was the jewel of the auction. Lot number 18. I was also here for that house, but they did not know it. No one knew it. I sat in a chair at the back. I placed my handbag on my lap. I took a paddle with the number 137. I held it with both hands, my wrinkled hands. My hands that had worked a lifetime. Hands that washed clothes by hand when Mason was little because we did not have a washing machine. Hands that cooked thousands of meals. Hands that cleaned other people's houses to pay for his private school, to pay for his books, to pay for everything he needed and more. The auctioneer banged his gavel. The room went silent. The auction began. The first lots were small properties. Apartments, plots of land. Things that did not draw much attention. People raised their paddles with boredom. Bids went up by $1,000 at a time. Nothing exciting yet. I looked forward, but my attention was on Mason and Victoria. They had not seen me. They were focused on their catalog. Victoria leaned toward Mason and whispered things in his ear. He smiled. That smile I knew as well. The smile of when he thought he had won something. The smile of anticipated victory. Then it happened. Victoria turned her head. Her eyes scanned the room, and she saw me. She saw me sitting there, with my simple dress, with my old bag, with my paddle in my hands. I saw her eyes widen a little more. I saw her mouth form a small O of surprise. Then I saw something worse. I saw her surprise turn into contempt, into mockery. She nudged Mason with her elbow. He turned around. He saw me. And in his face, I saw the same thing. I did not see the boy I raised. I did not see the son I hugged when he cried. I saw a stranger. I saw someone looking at me as if I had no right to be there. as if my presence were a mistake, an offense. Victoria laughed, a laugh she did not try to hide, a loud laugh that caused some people to turn and look at her. She covered her mouth with her hand, but her eyes were still laughing, still mocking. She whispered something to Mason. He shook his head, as if he could not believe it. As if my presence were the most absurd thing in the world. I did not move a muscle. I did not lower my gaze. I did not shrink in my chair. I looked directly at them, calmly, with the same tranquil expression I had maintained for years while they ignored me at family dinners, while they talked about their expensive trips without inviting me, while they planned their lives as if I did not exist. Victoria said something else to Mason. He nodded. Then, to my surprise, they got up. Both of them. They walked toward where I was. Their steps echoed on the marble floor. She with her heels, he with his Italian shoes that shone. They approached my table. They stood in front of me. Victoria looked me up and down. Her eyes scanned my dress, my bag, my shoes, everything. And in her gaze, there was something that hurt more than any direct insult. There was pity mixed with disgust, as if I were something pathetic that deserved compassion, but also repulsion. Mason spoke first. His voice was low but clear, low enough so the people nearby would not hear every word, but clear enough so I would not miss a single syllable. "Mom," he said, "what are you doing here?" It was not a question asked with curiosity. It was not a question asked with concern. It was a question asked with annoyance, with embarrassment, as if my presence shamed him, as if I were a problem that needed solving. "I came to the auction," I replied. My voice came out calm, steady, without tremors. Victoria let out a short laugh, a laugh that sounded like a bark. "To the auction," she repeated. She looked at Mason as if I had just said the most ridiculous thing in the world. "You? At a luxury property auction?" "Yes," I said. "Here I am." Mason ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he made when he was uncomfortable. "Mom, this isn't for you," he said. "These properties are very expensive. I don't know what made you think you could come here, but—" He left the sentence unfinished. But I knew how it ended. "But you don't have the money to be here. But this is for people like us, not for people like you. But you should leave before you make a fool of yourself." Victoria leaned a little toward me. She lowered her voice to almost a whisper. "What is that poor woman doing here at the auction?" she said. She said it as if it were a private joke with Mason, as if I were not sitting right in front of her, as if I couldn't hear her. I remained calm and quiet. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up. I did not make a scene. I simply looked them in the eyes, first Victoria, then Mason, and I saw on their faces the same thing I had seen for the last 5 years since they got married: contempt, indifference, the absolute certainty that I was worth nothing, that I was just a burden, an insignificant poor old woman. "I came to participate in the auction," I repeated. My voice remained steady, remained calm. I held my paddle a little higher so they could see it, so they could see my number. 137. Victoria looked at the paddle as if it were a joke, as if I were playing a game I did not understand. "Mason, please," she said, turning toward my son. "Tell her to leave. This is embarrassing. People are staring at us." It was true. Some people at the nearby tables had turned to look at us. Not obviously, but with those quick, discreet glances people use when they want to observe without seeming nosy. I could see their eyes moving toward us and then feigning interest in their catalogs. Mason sighed. "Mom, seriously, don't make this harder. I know you've been lonely lately, and maybe you thought coming here would be a way to feel included or something. But this isn't a social event. This is a serious auction of very expensive properties. You can't just come and sit down as if you were going to buy something." "And why not?" I asked. The question seemed to disconcert him. "Why? Because you don't have the money, Eleanor," Victoria said, using my name, with that tone of condescension she always used. "We all know you live off your Social Security check, a check that barely covers your basic expenses. There is nothing wrong with that. But you have to be realistic. This is not your place." I said nothing. I just looked at them. Victoria was expecting an answer, a justification. Maybe she expected me to get defensive, to apologize. to get up in shame and leave. But I did none of that. I stayed seated, still, with my paddle in my hands, with my bag on my lap, with that calm that only comes after years of accumulated pain. Mason leaned in closer. He lowered his voice even more. "Mom, please, don't make me look bad. It's complicated enough that you show up here unannounced. People are going to think we are family, and that is going to put us in an awkward position." "We are family," I said. "Yes, but..." Mason searched for the right words. "You know what I mean. Victoria and I have a reputation to maintain. We have contacts here. Important people who know us. If they start associating us with you in this context, it's going to look like that we too..." He didn't finish the sentence, but I finished it in my mind. That we too are poor, that we too are insignificant, that we too are out of place. The auctioneer announced the next lot, a plot of land on the coast. The bids began to rise quickly. $20,000, $25,000, $30,000. People raised their paddles with quick, sure movements, confident, as if that money meant nothing to them. Victoria turned toward the front. She stopped paying attention to me for a moment, but Mason was still standing there in front of me, looking at me with that mixture of frustration and impatience, as if I were a problem that needed to be solved as quickly as possible. "Okay, Mom," he said finally. "Stay if you want, but please don't lift that paddle. Don't make offers. Don't draw attention. Just sit quietly until this is over, and then we'll all go home. Okay?" I did not answer. I just looked at him. "Okay," he repeated more firmly. "I came to participate in the auction, Mason," I said again. "And that is exactly what I am going to do." His face changed. Frustration turned into something harder, into anger. "Mom, don't play games with me. You don't have money to buy anything here, not even the cheapest lot. So, stop acting like you are one of these people. You aren't, and you never will be." Those words from my own son, the boy I carried in my arms, the boy I fed with the money I earned cleaning houses, the boy for whom I bought his first suit for graduation by working double shifts for 3 months. That boy was now a man telling me that I would never be enough. Victoria turned around again. "Mason, leave her alone," she said. "She's not worth it. Let her stay if she wants. Anyway, when she sees the prices, she'll realize on her own that she can't be here. Besides, Lot 18 is almost coming up. We need to focus on that. Lot 18, the mansion, the $5 million property, the house of their dreams, the house they had been planning to buy for months. I knew because during one of the few times they invited me to dinner at their apartment, I heard them talking about it. They weren't talking to me directly. I was just sitting there at the table while they planned their future. They talked about the house as if it were already theirs, as if it were only a matter of time before they had it. Victoria had said, "Imagine, Mason, 5 bedrooms. We can have guests without them getting in the way. We can throw amazing parties. All our friends will want to come. It's going to be perfect." And Mason had replied, "I already spoke to the bank. We have a pre-approved loan for $4 million. We're going to need to put down $1 million as a down payment, but we have it. We've been saving for this. It's our chance." I had listened to all of that without saying a word. I had eaten my dinner in silence. I had washed my plate. I had gone home on the bus. And the whole way I had thought about that conversation, about how they had $1 million saved, about how they could ask for a loan of $4 million more, about how their life was so different from mine. But what they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I also had money. A lot of money. Money I had saved over 40 years, working tirelessly. Money I had invested intelligently, following the advice of a financial advisor I met when I was cleaning offices in a corporate building. Money that had grown year after year without anyone knowing, because I never mentioned it. I never bragged. I never changed my way of living. I kept living in my small house. I kept using the bus. I kept buying my clothes at discount stores. I remained invisible, because I had learned something important over the years. I had learned that people treat you differently when they think you have money. And I didn't want to be treated differently. I wanted to see who really loved me for who I was, not for what I had. And now I knew the truth. My own son didn't love me. He tolerated me. He put up with me. And only when it was absolutely necessary. Mason and Victoria returned to their table. I watched them sit down. I watched them open their catalog to the page of the mansion. I watched them point at the photos. I saw them smile with anticipation, with that certainty that soon that house would be theirs. The auctioneer continued with the lots, one after another. Apartments, commercial spaces, more land. Bids went up and down. People raised their paddles. The gavel fell. Sold. 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 I waited, patient, still, with my paddle in my hands, with my heart beating normally. No anxiety, no nerves, just with an absolute clarity of what I was going to do. While I waited for Lot 18 to arrive, my mind traveled to the past, to the years that built this moment, to all the times I swallowed the humiliation, to all the times I pretended not to hear the comments, to all the times I smiled when inside I was breaking. Mason was born when I was 30. His father, my husband, died when Mason was barely 2 years old. A car accident that left me a widow and alone with a small child and no savings, no life insurance, nothing but my hands and my will to give my son a better life than I had had. I worked in everything. I cleaned houses. I washed other people's clothes. I babysat for other families while mine stayed with my mother. I worked in restaurants, in hotels, in offices, any job that paid me enough to put food on the table and pay the rent for our small house. Mason was a bright boy. He got good grades. Teachers always told me he had potential, that he could go far if we gave him the right opportunities, and I made sure he had them. I paid for private school by working double shifts. I paid for extra math and science classes. I paid for uniforms. I paid for books. I paid for everything. I never bought him expensive toys. We never had vacations at the beach. We never ate at fancy restaurants. But he had an education. He had opportunities. And I thought that was enough. I thought when he grew up he would understand the sacrifice. I thought he would thank me. When Mason was 16, I got a job cleaning offices in a corporate building. I worked at night, from 10 in the evening to 6 in the morning. I cleaned desks. I emptied trash cans. I mopped floors. And during those night shifts, I met a man named Arthur Sterling. He worked as a financial advisor in one of the offices I cleaned. Sometimes he stayed working late. I saw him sitting there in front of his computer when I went in to clean his office. He was always kind to me. He always greeted me. He always asked how I was. Not like most people who didn't even look at me, to whom I was invisible. One night, Arthur saw me counting my pay. Crumpled bills that I kept in an envelope. He asked me if I was saving. I told him yes, that I saved everything I could, that I wanted to ensure my son could go to college, that I wanted to have something for emergencies. He spoke to me about investments, about how to make my money work for me, about index funds and retirement accounts. I didn't understand much at first, but he was patient. He explained everything simply. He helped me open my first investment account with $200 I had saved. And from that day, every month, without fail, I put money into that account. Sometimes it was $50, sometimes $100, depending on how much I could save. Arthur never charged me for his advice. He said he did it because he believed all people deserved financial security, not just the rich. Years passed. Mason finished high school. He got into college. He studied business administration. I kept working. I kept saving. I kept investing. My account grew, little by little, year after year. Compound interest worked its silent magic. Arthur called me every so often to review my investments, to adjust my portfolio, to make sure I was on the right track. When Mason graduated from college, I had saved almost $300,000, a fortune for me, more money than I had ever imagined having. But I didn't tell him. I didn't tell him anything because I wanted him to build his own life, to learn the value of work, not to depend on me. Mason got a good job at a tech company. He earned well, much better than I had ever earned. He moved into a nice apartment. He started wearing expensive suits. He started hanging out with people who had money. And he started to change. At first, the changes were subtle. He canceled our dinners because he had work commitments. He didn't answer my calls as quickly as before. When he came to visit me, he looked uncomfortable in my house. He looked at my old furniture, my faded curtains, my old television, and I could see in his eyes that he was ashamed. Then he met Victoria. She worked at the same company. She came from a family with money. Her father owned a chain of restaurants. Her mother was an interior designer. She had grown up in a big house with domestic help. She had never had to worry about money. When Mason introduced her to me, I knew immediately that she looked at me differently. She looked at me like I had been looked at my whole life by people like her, as if I were less, as if my poverty were contagious. During their dating period, Mason invited me less. Family dinners became rare. When there were important gatherings, I wasn't invited. When they got engaged, Victoria planned the whole wedding. I couldn't even give an opinion on anything. She chose the venue, the flowers, the menu, everything. And when they showed me the guest list, I saw they had put me at a table in the back, far from the head table, far from them. On the wedding day, Victoria wore a dress that cost more than I earned in a year. The reception was in an elegant hall with high ceilings and crystal chandeliers. There was French champagne, food prepared by renowned chefs, live music. Everything was perfect. Everything was expensive. And I was sitting there at my back table, in my simple dress bought at a discount store, feeling completely out of place. Mason barely spoke to me that day. He was busy with the important guests, with Victoria's friends, with the people who mattered. I didn't matter. I was just his poor mother, the woman who had raised him, but who was now an embarrassing reminder of where he came from. After the wedding, things got worse. Mason and Victoria moved into a luxury apartment. I was invited once, only once. And during that visit, Victoria made my place very clear. She spoke to me with that sweet and condescending tone people use when they want to insult you while keeping up appearances. "Eleanor," she told me while serving me tea in a fine china cup, "I understand that for you this must be very different. I know you're not used to this kind of thing. But don't worry, you don't have to feel intimidated. We all come from different places. There is nothing wrong with being humble." Humble, that word. As if my entire life of work and sacrifice was just humility. As if I had chosen to be poor. As if I hadn't fought every day to get ahead. Mason was sitting there listening to everything. And he said nothing. He didn't defend me. He didn't tell his wife to stop. He just smiled uncomfortably and changed the subject. That was the last time they invited me to their apartment. After that, when we saw each other, it was always in public places. In restaurants they chose. Expensive restaurants where I felt out of place, where the menu had no prices, and I knew every dish cost more than I spent on food in a week. And during those dinners, they talked about their lives, about their trips to Europe, about their plans to buy a house, about their investments, about their successful friends. And I just listened, because when I tried to talk about my life, about my work, about my things, they nodded politely, but without real interest, as if my words had no value. Meanwhile, my investment account kept growing. I kept working. I kept saving. I kept investing. Arthur called me every year with good news. "Your portfolio is growing well, Eleanor. You have done an excellent job. You have almost $1 million now. You should be proud." $1 million. I had $1 million, and my son thought I was poor, that I could barely survive on my pension, that I depended on the occasional charity he gave me when he remembered me. $50 here, $100 there, always with that attitude of superiority, as if he were saving my life, as if without his help I would starve. And I took that money. I took it and thanked him, because I wanted to see how far this would go. I wanted to see if one day he would ask how I really was, if I needed something more than money, if he missed me, if he thought of me, but he never did. The money was his way of quieting his conscience, of feeling that he fulfilled his duty as a son without having to invest time or real emotion in our relationship. I kept living in my small house, the same house where Mason grew up. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, old kitchen, furniture that was over 20 years old. I could have moved to a better place. I could have renovated everything. I could have bought a car. I could have traveled, but I didn't. Because every time I thought about spending that money on myself, I thought about Mason, about how he would react if he knew the truth. And a part of me wanted to keep that secret. I wanted to see who he really was when he thought I had nothing to offer him. The answer was painful, but clear. When he thought I had nothing, he had no time for me. He had no interest. He had no love. 6 months ago, Arthur called me with news. "Eleanor," he told me, "your portfolio has reached $6 million. You have been one of my best clients. Your discipline and patience have yielded extraordinary results. You should think about enjoying some of that money. You've earned it." $6 million. Me, the woman who cleaned floors, the woman my daughter-in-law called a charity case, the woman my son avoided in public. I had $6 million. More money than Mason and Victoria combined. More money than they had ever imagined I could have. And that was when I heard about the auction. Arthur mentioned to me that there would be a luxury property auction. That one of the properties was a spectacular mansion that would be sold below its market value. $5 million for a house worth almost $8 million. An incredible investment opportunity, he told me. I investigated the property. I saw the photos. I read the description. And something inside me moved. It wasn't just the house. It was what it represented. It was the chance to prove something. Not to Mason, not to Victoria, but to myself. To prove to myself that I had worth, that my life of sacrifice had meant something, that I was not the invisible woman they thought I was. Then, by chance, during one of those rare family dinners, I heard Mason and Victoria talking about exactly the same property, about the same auction, and I knew what I had to do. It wasn't revenge, or maybe it was, I'm not sure. I only know that something inside me said, go to that auction, buy that house, show them who you really are. And here I was, sitting in this elegant hall, with my simple dress and my old bag, with my paddle number 137 in my hands, waiting for the perfect moment. The auctioneer announced Lot 17, a penthouse downtown. Bidding started at $500,000. It went up fast. 600,000, 700,000, 800,000. The tension in the room increased. People leaned forward in their chairs. Paddles went up with more speed, more urgency. Mason and Victoria didn't even pay attention. They were focused on their catalog, on the photos of the mansion. Victoria had a pen in her hand and had marked something in the margins. Numbers probably. Their bidding strategy. How much they were willing to pay. How far they could go. The penthouse sold for $950,000. The gavel fell. Sold. Polite applause filled the room. The buyer, a man in a black suit, smiled with satisfaction. His wife hugged him. They had won their prize. The auctioneer took a sip of water. He organized his papers. He looked toward the audience with a professional smile. And now, he said with a clear, resonant voice, we arrive at the jewel of our auction today. Lot number 18, the Westwood Estate. A murmur ran through the room. People straightened in their seats. This was the moment everyone was waiting for. The most coveted property. The biggest opportunity. On the large screens on the sides of the stage appeared photos of the house. Beautiful images of perfect gardens. Of an infinity pool that seemed to merge with the lake in the background. Of spacious interiors with high ceilings and huge windows. Of elegant rooms with hardwood floors. Of a modern kitchen with stainless steel appliances. Of bathrooms with marble finishes. The Westwood Estate, continued the auctioneer, is a unique property. 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, 5 acres of land with direct lake views. Designed by internationally renowned architect Marcus Oliver. Gardens designed by award-winning landscaper Adelaide Miller. This property has an estimated market value of $8 million. Today we offer it with a starting price of $3 million. $3 million. An incredibly low starting price. That's why there were so many people here. That's why the hall was full. Everyone wanted a chance to get this house at a price below its real value. Victoria squeezed Mason's hand. I saw how their fingers intertwined. I saw how she smiled at him. I saw how she felt determined. They were ready, confident. Sure, that house would be theirs. Who offers $3 million? Asked the auctioneer. Immediately, several paddles went up. 5, 10, 15 interested people. The auctioneer smiled. Excellent. We have $3 million. Who offers $3,200,000? More paddles. The competition had begun. Mason raised his paddle. Victoria looked around, assessing the competition, seeing who the other people bidding were. trying to guess how much money they had. How far could they go? 3,400,000, 3,600,000, 3,800,000. The bids went up in increments of $200,000. Fast, relentless. Some people started lowering their paddles. They withdrew from the competition. The price was already too high for them. It was no longer the bargain they expected. $4 million, announced the auctioneer. Mason kept raising his paddle. Victoria looked nervous. This was reaching the limit of what they had planned. I could see it on their faces, worry starting to replace confidence. 4,200,000. 4,400,000. Now only 5 people were bidding. Mason, an older man with gray hair, a young woman with dark glasses, a middle-aged couple, and a lone man who looked bored, as if this were just a game to him. 4,600,000. Victoria whispered something to Mason. He shook his head. She insisted. He looked tense. The pressure was starting to show. The older man withdrew. He lowered his paddle and leaned back in his chair, defeated. 4 people remained. 4,800,000. The young woman lowered her paddle too. 3 people. Mason, the couple, the lone man. $5 million, announced the auctioneer. His voice had a tone of excitement now. This was what he lived for these battles. To see who had more resources, more determination, more need to win. Mason raised his paddle, but his hand trembled slightly. Victoria looked pale. 5 million was their absolute limit. The $1 million they had for the down payment, plus the $4 million loan from the bank. They couldn't go higher. They didn't have more. The middle-aged couple raised their paddle too. The lone man yawned and raised his with indifference. 5,200,000? asked the auctioneer. The silence that followed was heavy, dense, as if the whole room held its breath at the same time. Mason looked at Victoria. She shook her head. They couldn't. They didn't have any more money. They had reached their limit. The middle-aged couple looked at each other. The man whispered something. The woman nodded. They lowered their paddle. They were withdrawing. Only the lone man remained. He raised his paddle with a bored smile, as if $5,200,000 were pocket change to him, as if this meant nothing. 5,200,000 going once, said the auctioneer, raising his gavel. Victoria had tears in her eyes. Mason clenched his fists on the table. They had lost. The house they wanted, the house they had planned, the house they already saw as theirs. It was slipping through their fingers. 5,200,000 going twice? I looked at my paddle, the number 137 written in black on a white background. My hands held it firmly. My old hands, my wrinkled hands, my hands that had worked so hard, that had cleaned so many floors, that had washed so many clothes, that had made so much sacrifice. These hands now held the power to change everything. 30 minutes had passed since Victoria scoffed at me, since she asked what that poor woman was doing here at the auction. 30 minutes since Mason told me this was not my place, that I would never be one of these people. 30 minutes of waiting in silence, of observing, of staying calm, of letting them believe they had won, that I was no threat, that I was just a poor old lady who didn't understand where she was. The auctioneer's gavel began to descend, and I raised my paddle. I raised it high, firm, without trembling, with all the dignity I had kept for 72 years of life, with all the strength I had accumulated over decades of being invisible, of being ignored, of being belittled. $5,300,000, I said. My voice sounded clear, strong. It resonated in the hall like thunder in the midst of silence. All heads turned toward me, all gazes locked on my face. The auctioneer lowered his gavel slowly. He looked at me with evident surprise. The entire room was in absolute shock. But no one was more surprised than Mason and Victoria. I saw my son's face turn white, as if he had seen a ghost, as if what had just happened were impossible, as if reality had shattered before his eyes. Victoria opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes opened so wide it looked like they were going to pop out. Her hand let go of Mason's. Her other hand flew to her chest, as if she couldn't breathe. The auctioneer recovered his composure quickly. He was a professional after all. "We have $5,300,000 from the lady in the back," he announced. Does anyone offer 5,400,000? The lone man looked at me. He assessed the situation. He looked at the auctioneer. He looked at his catalog. And then, to my surprise, he smiled. A genuine smile, as if he appreciated what he had just witnessed, and he lowered his paddle. He was withdrawing. The house was mine if no one else bid. 5,400,000, repeated the auctioneer, looking around the room. Total silence. No one raised their paddle. No one dared. The price was already high, and the determination on my face probably told them that I would go higher if necessary. Much higher. 5,300,000 going once, said the auctioneer. Mason stood up abruptly. His chair made a loud noise against the marble floor. "Mom!" he shouted. "What are you doing?" I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the auctioneer. My paddle remained raised, firm, unwavering. 5,300,000 going twice, continued the auctioneer, ignoring the interruption. He was used to drama at these auctions. This probably wasn't anything new to him. "Mom, please," said Mason, walking toward me. People turned to look at him. Victoria followed him. Her heels clicked loudly on the floor. She looked hysterical, broken, as if her world were collapsing. "Sir," said the auctioneer, addressing Mason with a firm tone, "please return to your seat. The auction is in progress." "But she is my mother," protested Mason. "She can't pay that. This is a mistake. She doesn't have that money. Please, you have to stop this." The auctioneer looked at me. "Ma'am," he asked with professional courtesy, "are you making a serious offer? Do you have the means to complete this transaction?" "Yes," I replied with a calm voice. "I have the means." "My offer is serious." "Liar!" shouted Victoria. "She has nothing. She lives on a miserable pension. She can't buy a $5 million house. This is ridiculous." The auctioneer frowned. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Victoria, "please control yourself or I will have to ask you to leave the room. This is a serious auction. All participants have been previously verified. If the lady has her paddle, it is because she has met the necessary financial requirements." It was true. Before the auction, all participants had to present proof of funds. I had brought a letter from my bank certifying that I had more than $6 million in liquid assets available. The auction staff had verified everything. That's why they had given me my paddle. That's why I was here. Because I had proven I had the money. But Mason and Victoria knew nothing of that. To them, I was poor. To them, this was impossible. To them, their reality was shattering piece by piece. "It can't be," muttered Victoria. "It can't be. This isn't happening." Mason looked at me with eyes full of confusion, of shock, of something that might have been pain but was probably just disbelief. "Mom," he whispered, "where did you get that money?" I finally looked at him. I looked him in the eyes. The same eyes that as a child looked at me with love. The same eyes that now looked at me as if I were a stranger, an imposter, someone who shouldn't be here. "I saved," I told him simply. "For 40 years. I invested. I worked. I sacrificed. While I raised you. While I paid for your school. While I gave you everything you needed. I was also building my own future. A future I never shared with you because I wanted to see who you really were. And now I know." His eyes filled with something. Shame, perhaps. Or maybe just shock. I'm not sure. I didn't really care. The auctioneer banged his gavel against the podium. 5,300,000 going 3 times, he asked for the last time. No one said anything. No one raised their paddle. The entire room watched us. This was the drama people would remember. The story they would tell. The old woman no one noticed. The one who seemed poor. The one who raised her paddle at the end and beat everyone. The gavel fell. The sound resonated like a gunshot. "Sold," announced the auctioneer. "To bidder number 137 for $5,300,000. Applause. The room erupted in applause. I'm not sure if they were applauding the sale or the spectacle they had witnessed, but they applauded. Loudly. Long. I lowered my paddle slowly. My hands no longer trembled. My heart beat normally. Calm. As if I had just done something completely ordinary. As if I had just bought bread at the store. Not a $5 million mansion. Victoria dropped into her chair. She covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook. She was crying from rage, from frustration, from humiliation, because she had been humiliated. In public, by the poor mother-in-law she had despised, by the old woman she had called a charity case, by the woman she thought would never be a threat. Mason remained standing, looking at me, speechless, not knowing what to say, not knowing what to do. Everything he thought he knew about me had been a lie, or not exactly a lie, but an incomplete truth. I had let him believe what he wanted to believe, and he had chosen to believe the worst. The auction staff approached me with papers, documents I needed to sign, purchase forms, payment instructions. They explained the process with professional and courteous voices. I had 3 days to transfer the money. Then the property transfer process would begin. Everything was standard. Everything was normal. As if buying a $5 million mansion was something I did every day. I signed the papers with a steady hand. My signature looked small on those elegant documents. Eleanor Vance, 72 years old, owner of a mansion worth more than everything my son and daughter-in-law had combined. Mason finally reacted. He walked toward me while I finished signing. He stood beside me. I could feel his presence, his confusion radiating from him like waves of heat. "Mom," he said in a low voice, "we need to talk." "Now you want to talk?" I replied without looking at him. I kept reading the documents, verifying every line, every number. "Please," he insisted, "I need to understand what is happening. Do you really have that money? How is it possible?" I looked up at him. I looked him directly in the eyes. "How is it possible?" I repeated. "It is possible because I worked my whole life, because I saved every penny I could, because I didn't spend my money on expensive clothes or fancy restaurants or luxurious vacations, because I invested intelligently, because I was disciplined, because I had a plan. Does that answer your question?" He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he had done since childhood. "But why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you live as if you had nothing?" "Because I wanted to see who you really were," I replied. "I wanted to see how you treated me when you thought I had nothing to offer you, and now I know. Now I know exactly who my son is." His eyes filled with something that looked like pain. "I didn't," he started to say. "It wasn't my intention." "It wasn't your intention, what?" I interrupted him. "It wasn't your intention to be ashamed of me? It wasn't your intention to avoid me in public? It wasn't your intention to let your wife humiliate me? It wasn't your intention to treat me as if I were a shameful burden in your perfect life? Mom, please." He lowered his voice even more. "People are watching us." And there it was, his real concern. Not that he had hurt me, not that he had been a bad son, but that people were watching us, that this was embarrassing for him, that his image was being damaged. "Let them watch," I said calmly. "I don't care what people think anymore. For too many years, I cared. For too many years, I made myself small so you would feel big, so you wouldn't be ashamed of your poor mother. But that is over." I finished signing the last document. The auction representative handed me a folder with copies of everything. He gave me a card with his contact information. He congratulated me on my purchase. He told me that the Westwood estate was an exceptional property, that I was going to love it. "Thank you," I told him. "I am sure I will." Victoria appeared on my other side. Her makeup was ruined by tears. Her face looked broken, ugly even. The beauty she normally projected had disappeared under the weight of rage and humiliation. "This isn't fair," she said with a trembling voice. "We wanted that house. We've been saving for years. We had everything planned. You can't just show up and take it from us." "I didn't take anything from you," I replied. "This was an open auction. Everyone had the same opportunity. You bid, I bid more. That is how auctions work." "But you knew we wanted it," continued Victoria. "You heard us talking about it. You came here specifically to ruin it. This is revenge. This is cruel." I stood up. I took my handbag. I held my folder with the purchase documents. I looked Victoria directly in the eyes. "Revenge," I said slowly, "would be doing to you what you did to me. It would be humiliating you in public, calling you poor, asking what you are doing here, treating you like you are worth nothing. But I didn't do that. I simply bought a house I wanted. A house I can afford. A house that will be mine. If that hurts you, maybe you should ask yourselves why. You did this on purpose, spat Victoria. You came here to hurt us. I came here, I told her, to buy a property, to exercise my right like any other person in this room. The fact that you feel hurt is not my problem. It is yours. Mason intervened. Mom, listen, I know we have made mistakes. I know we haven't treated you well. But we can fix this. We can talk. We can. We can what? I asked. You can treat me well now that you know I have money? You can respect me now that I bought a house more expensive than the one you could afford? You can love me now that it turns out I am not the poor old woman you thought I was? The silence that followed was devastating, because Mason could not deny what I had just said, because it was the truth, and we both knew it. His renewed interest in me was not because he finally realized he had treated me badly. It was because I now had something he wanted. Respect, money, status. People in the room were still watching. Some pretended not to. Others looked openly. This was better than any soap opera. It was real drama. Raw, painful. Victoria took a step toward me. Her expression changed. It softened. She tried to smile through her tears. Eleanor, she said, using that sweet and fake tone I knew so well. I know we have had our differences. I know I haven't always been the best daughter-in-law. But we are family. And family forgives. Family supports each other. Maybe we could start over. Maybe we could. No, I interrupted her. We are not going to start over. We are not going to pretend nothing happened. I am not going to forget years of contempt because now it suits you to get along with me. But the house, said Victoria. Her voice now had a tone of desperation. Maybe you could. I mean, we really wanted that house. We planned our whole life around it. Maybe you could sell it to us. We would pay you what you paid, plus a little extra. We could make a deal. I almost laughed. Almost. But the moment was too serious. Too important. Sell you the house, I said. The house I just bought? The house I bid for specifically because I wanted it? Why would I do that? Because we are family, replied Victoria quickly. Because you are Mason's mother. Because you love us? There it was. Emotional manipulation. The attempt to use maternal love as a weapon, as leverage to get what they wanted. Because they knew that for years that had worked, that I had yielded again and again, that I had sacrificed my own happiness for Mason's, that I had put his needs before mine. But those days were over. I love you both, I said slowly. I loved my son. I loved the boy I raised. But that boy no longer exists. The man standing in front of me now is someone I don't recognize. Someone who shames me. Not because he is poor or rich, but because he lacks something fundamental. He lacks kindness, compassion, gratitude. Mason recoiled as if I had hit him. Mom, he whispered. I'm not going to sell you the house, I continued. I'm going to live in it. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to wake up every morning with a view of the lake. I'm going to swim in that infinity pool. I'm going to walk through those perfect gardens. I'm going to make that house my home. The home I deserve after a lifetime of work. The home I never allowed myself to have because I was always saving, always sacrificing, always thinking of others before myself. Victoria opened her mouth to protest, but I raised my hand. I wasn't finished. And every time I look at that house, I said, I'm going to remember this moment. I'm going to remember how you treated me. I'm going to remember the humiliations, the contempt, the mockery. And I'm also going to remember that I survived, that I overcame, that I won. Not because I beat you, but because I finally won myself back. Because I finally gave myself permission to be more than just a mother, more than just a servant to the needs of others. I gave myself permission to be Eleanor, just Eleanor, and that is enough. The room remained silent, a silence so deep I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the beating of my heart, calm, steady, without fear, without regret, only absolute certainty that I had done the right thing. Mason looked at Victoria, then he looked at me. His eyes were searching for something. Maybe he expected me to give in, to say it was a joke, that this was all a misunderstanding. But I said nothing more. I had already said everything I needed to say. "This is insane," said Victoria finally. Her voice was now hard, cold. The sweet and manipulative tone had disappeared. Now only rage remained. "You don't need a house like that. You are a simple person. What are you going to do in a 5-bedroom mansion? You're going to be alone there. It's going to be too big for you, too empty." "I prefer to be alone in an empty mansion than surrounded by family who despises me," I replied. The sentence fell like a bomb between us. Victoria took a step back, as if I had slapped her. Mason closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there were tears in them. Tears he did not shed, but that were there, shining, threatening to fall. "We never despised you," he said with a broken voice. "Never." "Never?" I repeated. "Are you really going to say that? Are you really going to stand there and lie to my face after everything that has happened?" He searched for the words. It wasn't contempt, it was just, we were different. We lived different lives. I didn't know how to treat me with basic respect. I interrupted him. "How to invite me into your life? How to introduce me to your friends without shame? How to include me in your plans? It's not that hard, Mason. It doesn't require money. It doesn't require status. It only requires love. And that is exactly what you didn't have for me." An older man, who had been sitting nearby, approached. "Excuse me," he said with a kind voice. "I just wanted to tell you that you made an excellent purchase. The Westwood estate is an extraordinary property. My wife and I considered it, but we decided it was too big for us. I'm glad you found someone who really appreciates it." "Thank you," I told him. "I really appreciate it." He nodded. He looked at Mason and Victoria with an expression I couldn't completely decipher. Maybe disapproval, maybe pity. Then he walked away. But that small gesture of validation from a stranger meant more to me than anything my son could say at that moment. Victoria turned to Mason. "Let's go," she said. "There's no point in staying here. We already lost. It's clear your mother has decided to be selfish, that she has decided to punish us for reasons she invents in her head. We can't reason with someone like that. Selfish." The word came out of my mouth with a bitter laugh. Me, who worked 3 jobs to pay for your private education, Mason. Me, who didn't buy new clothes for years to save money for your college. Me, who sacrificed every day of my life to give you opportunities I never had. I am the selfish one? "That was your choice," said Victoria. "No one forced you to do all that. You decided to have a child. You decided to raise him. Those were your decisions. Now you can't use that as an excuse to emotionally manipulate us." Her words were like knives, sharp, designed to wound. And they did. For a moment, I felt the air escape my lungs, my heart contracting. But then I remembered where I was. I remembered what I had just done. I remembered that I now had the power, not them. "You're right," I said calmly. "Those were my decisions, and this is also my decision. The decision to no longer allow you to treat me like trash. The decision to live the rest of my life with dignity, with respect, with peace." Mason finally spoke. His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am sorry. I didn't realize. I didn't know you felt this way." "You never asked," I replied. "In 5 years of marriage. Never once did you ask me how I felt, how I was, what I needed. You just assumed I was fine, that I was happy with the crumbs of attention you gave me, with the occasional dinners where you ignored me, with the money you gave me as if it were charity." "I thought I was helping you," said Mason. "I thought you needed that money." "I never needed it," I told him. "Every penny you gave me I saved. I never spent it, because it wasn't about the money. It was about seeing if you would ever wonder why I wasn't spending it, if you would ever be curious about my life, about my finances, about anything beyond your assumption that I was poor and helpless." The auction staff began to pack up. People were starting to leave. The event was over. Only a few scattered groups remained. Some watched us with poorly concealed curiosity. Others pretended not to notice the family drama unfolding in the middle of the elegant hall. "Mom?" Mason tried once more. "Can we go somewhere to talk? Alone, without all this, without people watching." "There is nothing left to talk about," I replied. "Everything I needed to say, I already said. Everything I needed to do, I already did. Now I just want to go home. To my old house, while I wait for the new one to be ready. And us? Asked Victoria. Her voice now had a different tone. It wasn't rage anymore. It was something closer to panic. What are we supposed to do? We spent all our money preparing for that house. We made plans. We promised our friends we'd throw a housewarming party. How are we going to explain that we lost it? That is not my problem, I said. You will have to find another house. Another opportunity. Just like I had to find a way to survive when I was left a widow with a small child and no money. Just like I had to find the strength to work multiple jobs when I was so tired I could barely stand. Life doesn't always give us what we want. Sometimes we have to accept what comes and move on. But you could help us, insisted Victoria. You have money. You have more than you need. Could you? No, I interrupted her firmly. I am not going to help you. Not because I don't have the money, but because you need to learn something I learned a long time ago. You need to learn that life owes you nothing. That respect is earned. That family is not just a title. It is actions. It is love. It is being present. It is valuing people for who they are, not for what they have. Mason rubbed his face with his hands. When he lowered them, he looked defeated, tired, as if he finally understood the magnitude of what he had lost. And it wasn't the house. It was something much more valuable. It was his mother. It was the relationship we could have had if he had chosen differently. So that's it, he asked. Are we nothing to you anymore? You are what you always were, I replied. My son and my daughter-in-law. But that no longer means what it used to mean. It no longer means I will accept whatever treatment you give me. It no longer means I will sacrifice my happiness for yours. It no longer means I will make myself invisible so you can shine. What does it mean then? Asked Mason. It means that if you want to have me in your lives, it will be on my terms. It means you will treat me with respect, with consideration, with the love a mother deserves. And if you can't do that, then it's better we go our separate ways, because I am no longer going to accept less than I deserve. Victoria let out a bitter laugh. This is unbelievable, she said. You came here to destroy us, to take what we wanted most, and now you act like you're the victim. I didn't come to destroy you, I said, looking directly at her. You destroyed yourselves, with your attitudes, with your arrogance, with your cruelty. I just bought a house. The fact that that has emotionally destroyed you says more about you than it does about me. I picked up my bag. I adjusted my folder with the documents under my arm. I prepared to leave, to walk toward the door, to leave this hall and start my new life. A life where I was the priority, where my needs mattered, where my happiness didn't depend on anyone else's approval. Mom, wait, said Mason, taking a step toward me. Please, there has to be something we can do, some way to fix this. I stopped. I looked at him one last time. I saw in his eyes something I hadn't seen in years. Real fear, the fear of losing me, not for convenience, not for money, but because maybe, finally, he was realizing what it really meant not to have me in his life. There is something you can do, I told Mason. You can think. You can reflect on how we got here. You can ask yourself why a mother who loved her son more than anything in the world decided it was enough. You can examine your actions, your words, your attitudes. And maybe, if you really do that hard work of looking in the mirror honestly, you might understand. Understand what? He asked. That this wasn't about a house? I replied. It was never about the house. It was about dignity, about respect, about recognizing that I am a person with value, not just your mother, not just the woman who raised you, but Eleanor, a complete woman, with dreams of her own, with desires of her own, with the right to live her life on her own terms. But we always knew, protested Mason weakly. We always knew you were a person. Really? I asked. Then why did you never ask me about my dreams? Why did you never ask what I wanted to do with my life beyond being your mother? Why did you assume I was content living in that small house, wearing old clothes, taking the bus, being invisible? Because we thought that was what you wanted, said Victoria. We thought you were happy like that. Happy? I repeated the word, as if it were bitter on my tongue. I wasn't happy. I was resigned. I had accepted my place. I had accepted being small. I had accepted that my life of sacrifice was all I would have, until one day I woke up and realized I didn't have to accept that I had worked, that I had saved, that I had options, and that it was time to choose myself. The hall was now almost empty. Only we remained, and a couple of employees cleaning discreetly. The lights seemed brighter without all the people. The space felt bigger, colder. Our voices echoed against the walls differently. "Look, Mom," said Mason with a tired voice. "I understand you're upset. I understand we made mistakes. But this thing of buying the house we wanted, this thing of humiliating us in public, this isn't like you. This isn't what a mother who loves her son would do." "And what is a mother who loves her son like?" I asked. "Is she someone who lets herself be stepped on? Someone who accepts any treatment without complaining? Someone who sacrifices everything, even her dignity, for that son's happiness? Because if that's what you believe, then you have a very distorted view of love." "I didn't mean that," said Mason quickly. "But you said it," I replied, "and that is part of the problem. For years, your view of me has been of someone who exists to serve you, to make your life easier, to disappear when I'm not convenient and appear when you need me. That is not a relationship. That is usage." Victoria crossed her arms. "Honestly," she said with a cold tone, "I think you're being dramatic. I think you're turning this into something bigger than it is. All children distance themselves from their parents when they grow up. It's natural. It's healthy. It doesn't mean we don't love you. It just means we have our own lives. Distancing is one thing," I told her. "Despising is another. When you saw me here today, your first reaction wasn't surprise or curiosity. It was mockery. It was asking what that poor woman was doing here. Those were your words. You didn't worry about how I got here. You didn't wonder if I needed help. You just assumed I didn't belong and decided to make that very clear." She opened her mouth to protest but closed it. She had no defense. Because it was true. I had heard her. Everyone had heard. And there was no way to deny what she had said. "My decision to buy this house," I continued, "was not to hurt you. It was to save myself. For too long I have lived under the weight of being who you wanted me to be. The poor mother. The humble mother. The mother who causes no problems. The mother who settles for any crumb of attention. But that woman no longer exists. She died today, in this hall. And in her place stands a woman who finally understands her own value." "And what value is that?" asked Victoria sarcastically. "The value of your bank account?" "The value of having survived," I replied without getting upset. "The value of having raised a son alone. The value of having worked until my body screamed in pain but kept going because I had to. The value of having turned $200 into $6 million through discipline and intelligence. The value of having maintained my humanity even when the world tried to strip it from me. That is my value, and it has nothing to do with money. Money is just a tool that gives me freedom. Freedom to choose, freedom to say no, freedom to live." Mason sat in one of the chairs. He looked defeated, broken even. "I don't know what to say, Mom," he muttered. "I don't know how to fix this." "Maybe it can't be fixed," I said softly. "Maybe some things once broken don't go back to being what they were. Maybe the best we can do is accept that you made mistakes, that I made decisions, and that now we have to live with the consequences." "So, that's it?" he asked, looking at me with moist eyes. "You don't want to have a relationship with me anymore?" "I didn't say that," I replied. "I said that if you want a relationship with me, it's going to be different. It's going to be on my terms. You're going to have to show me with actions, not just words, that you value my presence in your life. You're going to have to treat me with the respect I deserve. And you're going to have to accept that I am no longer the mother you can ignore when it suits you." "And how do we do that?" asked Mason. "How do we show that?" "That is something you have to figure out," I replied. "I am no longer going to do the emotional work for you. I am no longer going to make things easy for you. I am no longer going to be the one chasing the relationship. If you want to have me in your lives, you're going to have to make an effort. You're going to have to show up. You're going to have to be consistent. And you're going to have to do it without expecting anything in return." Victoria snorted. "So basically, you want us to crawl back to you, to beg you, to treat you like you're some kind of queen. No, I said calmly. I want you to treat me like a human being, with basic respect, with consideration, with kindness. If that seems to you like treating me like a queen, then the problem isn't me. The problem is that your bar is so low that basic respect seems excessive to you. She didn't answer. She just looked at me with rage, with resentment, with that look that clearly said she blamed me for everything, that I was the villain in her story, that I had ruined her perfect plans. And maybe she was right, in a sense. I had ruined her plans. But only because her plans included continuing to trample on me. I turned to leave. I took a few steps toward the door. Then I stopped. There was something else I needed to say, something important. I turned to look at them one last time. You know, I said, for a long time I wondered what I had done wrong. Why didn't my son love me the way I loved him? Why wasn't I enough? Why didn't my sacrifices matter? And I blamed myself. I thought maybe I hadn't been a good mother, that maybe I had failed in some fundamental way. I paused. I took a deep breath. But today I realized something. It wasn't my failure. I did everything I could with what I had. I was the best mother I could be. The problem wasn't that I wasn't enough. The problem was that you never learned to value what you had. You never learned gratitude. You never learned humility. And that is not my responsibility to fix. That is your work. Mom, whispered Mason. A tear finally fell down his cheek. I'm sorry. I really am sorry. I know, I said. And maybe someday that I'm sorry will mean something. Maybe someday you will be willing to do the real work of changing, of being better, of being the son I needed you to be. But until that day comes, I am going to live my life. I am going to enjoy my new house. I am going to do the things I always wanted to do, but never allowed myself. I am going to travel. I am going to read. I am going to rest. I am going to be happy. Without us? Asked Mason with a broken voice. If necessary, I replied, yes, without you. Because I learned something important today. I learned that being alone is better than being accompanied by people who make me feel lonely. I learned that peace is more valuable than dysfunctional family. I learned that I deserve more. And finally, I am ready to claim it. I walked toward the door of the hall. My steps echoed on the marble. Firm, sure, without doubt. Every step took me away from them, from the humiliation, from the pain, and brought me closer to something new, something I didn't completely understand yet, but that felt like a promise in my chest. Behind me, I heard Victoria say something in a low voice, Mason. I couldn't hear the exact words, but the tone was clear. Rage, frustration, blame directed toward me. He was probably saying that I was impossible, that I was the villain, that they were the victims of my cruel whim. Let them think what they wanted. I didn't care anymore. I walked out of the building to the parking lot. The sun was shining bright. The air was crisp. I took a deep breath. It smelled of freedom, of a new beginning, of infinite possibilities that before I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. I walked to the bus stop. I could have called a cab. I could have ordered a luxury car service. Now I had money for that. But I wanted to take the bus. One last time from this place. One last time as the woman I had been. Because starting tomorrow, everything would be different. The bus arrived 15 minutes later. I got on. I paid my fare. I sat in my usual seat near the window. The driver recognized me. He greeted me with a smile. He didn't know what had just happened. He didn't know that the older lady who took his bus every day had just bought a $5 million mansion. He didn't know that I had changed my whole world in one afternoon. And I liked that. The normality of that moment. The simplicity. The reminder that I was still me. Money hadn't changed me fundamentally. It had only given me options. And today I had chosen the most important option of all. Choosing myself. I arrived at my house an hour later. The same small house where I had lived for 40 years. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, old kitchen, worn furniture. But it was mine, and it had been my refuge for so long. My safe place when the world was too hard. I went in. I closed the door behind me. Silence enveloped me. A different silence than the one in the auction hall. This was a familiar silence, comfortable, full of memories, of years lived, of tears shed. of laughter shared when Mason was little, of lonely nights after he grew up and left. I sat on my old sofa. I put the folder with the house documents on the coffee table. I looked at those papers, physical proof of what I had done, of the decision I had made, of the life I had claimed. My phone rang. It was Mason. I looked at his name on the screen. For 30 seconds I let it ring without answering. Part of me wanted to answer, the maternal part that never dies completely no matter how much they hurt you. But the stronger part of me, the part that had been born today in that hall, told me to wait. I didn't answer. The phone stopped ringing. 2 minutes later, a text message. "Mom, please, we need to talk. Not like this. Not this way." I didn't reply. I put the phone face down on the table. There would be time for conversations later, or maybe there wouldn't be. But right now, I needed silence. I needed to process. I needed to simply be. The following days were strange. I went back to my normal routine. I woke up early. I made my coffee. I read the newspaper. I went for a walk. I went to the market. I did the simple and ordinary things I had always done. But everything felt different, as if I were watching my life from the outside, as if I were an actress playing the role of my old life while my new life waited in the wings of the stage. Mason called every day. He left messages, long texts, explaining, apologizing, begging us to talk. Victoria wrote too. Her messages were different. Fewer apologies, more justifications, more attempts to explain why they were right and I was exaggerating. More manipulation disguised as concern. I didn't reply to any of them. Not yet. I needed this time. This space. This distance to understand who I was now. Who did I want to be? Arthur Sterling, my financial advisor, called to congratulate me. He had heard about the purchase. He told me he was proud, that I had made an excellent investment, that I was going to love the house. We talked for an hour about the next steps, about how to manage my finances now that I had made this large purchase, about investment options for the remaining money. During that conversation, I realized something. Arthur had been more family to me than my own son in recent years. Arthur had cared about my future. He had invested time in teaching me. He had celebrated my successes, without expecting anything in return, just because he believed I deserved financial security. 3 weeks later, I received the keys to the Westwood estate. I went alone to see it for the first time as the owner. I drove there in a car I rented, because I hadn't bought my own yet. I was still getting used to the idea that I could do those things, that I could spend money on myself without guilt. The house was more beautiful than I remembered from the photos. The gardens were perfect. The lake shimmered under the sun. The pool reflected the sky. I entered through the front door. My steps echoed on the hardwood floors. The rooms were huge, empty, waiting to be filled with life, with furniture, with new memories. I walked through every room. I touched the walls. I looked out the windows. I stood on the balcony overlooking the lake, and for the first time in weeks, I cried. Not tears of sadness, but of liberation, of relief, of gratitude toward myself for having had the courage to do this, to claim my life. That day, standing on the balcony of my new mansion, I made a decision. I was going to allow Mason back into my life, but on my terms. As I had said, he would have to demonstrate real change, consistency, genuine effort. And if he couldn't do that, then that would be fine too, because I now knew something fundamental. I was complete on my own. I didn't need his validation. I didn't need his love to feel valuable. I was already valuable. I always had been. I called Mason that night. He answered on the first ring. "Mom," he said with a voice full of emotion, "thank you for calling. I've been so worried." "So, listen," I interrupted him gently. "I'm going to say this only once. I am willing to try to rebuild our relationship. But it's going to be different. You are going to come to my new house every Sunday for dinner. Just you. Without Victoria. At least for now, we are going to talk. Really talk. Not about superficial things, but about real things. About feelings. About mistakes. About how to move forward. And you are going to listen. Really listen. Not just wait for your turn to speak. Can you do that?" "Yes," he replied immediately. "Yes, Mom." Whatever it takes. I will do whatever it takes. And Mason, I added, if you come, you have to come because you really want to fix this. Not because you feel an obligation. Not because you want something from me. But because you understand that you hurt me and you want to be better. Do you understand? I understand, he said with a trembling voice. I promise. Good, I said. Then I'll see you Sunday. At 6 in the evening, I'll send you the address. I hung up the phone. I didn't know if this would work. I didn't know if Mason could really change. I didn't know if our relationship could heal. But I knew I was trying on my own terms, and that was enough. The following months were of transformation. I hired designers to decorate the house, not in an ostentatious way, but with simple elegance, with comfort, with spaces that invited peace, reflection, the quiet life I had always wanted but never allowed myself to have. Mason came every Sunday. At first, the conversations were awkward, tense, full of long silences. But little by little, week after week, we began to rebuild something different from what we had before, something more honest, more real. He talked to me about his life, about his fears, about how success had changed him in ways he hadn't noticed, about how Victoria had influenced his attitudes toward me, not as an excuse, but as an explanation. And slowly, he began to take responsibility, to see his role in what had happened. I spoke to him about my life too, about my loneliness, about my pain, about the years of feeling invisible, and he listened. He really listened. And he cried. He cried for the mother he had ignored, for the lost years, for the damage done. The healing wasn't quick. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And that was what mattered. Victoria eventually asked for forgiveness. Months later. An apology, written in a letter. I don't know if it was genuine. I don't know if she really understood what she had done. But I accepted it, not for her, but for me. Because I no longer carried resentment. I no longer needed her validation or her regret to move forward. Now, sitting on the balcony of my house, looking at the lake while the sun sets, I think about that day at the auction, the day everything changed. The day I raised my paddle and bought more than a house. I bought my freedom, my dignity, my life. It wasn't revenge I sought that day. It was justice. Justice for myself. For all the years of unrecognized sacrifice. For all the humiliations endured in silence. For all the times I made myself small so others could feel big. And justice arrived. Not in the form of loud revenge, but in the form of quiet peace. In the form of calm days in my beautiful house. In the form of relationships rebuilt on honest terms. In the form of finally understanding my own value. I am 72 years old, and finally I am living, really living. Not surviving, not sacrificing, but living fully. With dignity, with peace, with the absolute certainty that I deserve every moment of happiness I find. My daughter-in-law and my son scoffed at me at the auction. They asked me what that poor woman was doing there. I remained calm and quiet. And 30 minutes later, I raised my paddle and bought the mansion they wanted. But more important than that, I bought myself back. And that is priceless.